In 1864, Union soldiers forced open the iron doors of the Thornhill Estate in Burke County, Georgia, and uncovered a scene that would haunt them for life. Locked away in the basement were 23 children, all sharing the same strange features: high cheekbones, pale green eyes, and auburn hair streaked with gold. Some were barely 4 years old, while others were in their early teens. The oldest, a 13-year-old girl, whispered something to the soldiers that made hardened veterans feel sick to their core. "Mistress says we are her legacy. We cannot leave because we are her blood." Military files from the 34th Massachusetts Infantry briefly mentioned this disturbing discovery in a single confidential letter, hidden away in regimental archives for more than a century. Local accounts of Burke County erase Thornhill Estate completely, as if both the plantation and its mistress had never existed. But they did, and what Katherine Thornhill created during the 16 years between her husband's death and the arrival of federal troops remains one of the darkest experiments in American history. A calculated breeding program meant to create generations of enslaved people bound by bloodline, unable to ever escape. Before we continue with the twisted legacy of Katherine Thornhill, I need you to do something. If this story already makes your skin crawl, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel uncovers the forgotten horrors of American history, the stories classrooms won't teach, the secrets buried in courthouse basements, and the records left to rot in military files. And I want to know something from you. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment with your city or state. Are you near Burke County, Georgia? Does your town hide stories like this? Let's uncover them together. Now let's return to the beginning. It was a cold February morning in 1847, when a young widow inherited a crumbling plantation and conceived a plan that would scar Georgia's history. That winter was the harshest Burke County had seen in 2 decades. Thornhill Estate stretched over 1,700 acres of red clay, about 7 miles southwest of Waynesboro, the county seat. By 1847, Burke County was cotton land, but unlike the wealthy Black Belt to the west, its soil had been drained by decades of overuse. Plantations that once thrived in the 1820s were collapsing by the 1840s under falling cotton prices, worn-out land, and rising expenses. The Mexican War had pulled laborers away, and heated debates over expansion fractured communities. Thornhill had once been among the county's stronger properties. Jonathan Thornhill inherited it in 1838 with 42 enslaved workers, decent tools, and manageable debt. But Jonathan was reclass a poor farmer and an eager gambler. When a winter fever claimed his life in February 1847, the estate was drowning in debt, its fields barely sustaining those who worked them. With creditors circling like vultures, Katherine was just 28 when she became a widow. She had married Jonathan at 19, in a union arranged by her father, Theodore Danforth, a wealthy merchant from Augusta. The Danforths were old Georgia money, tracing back to settlers of the 1730s. Katherine had been privately educated, spoke some French, and was raised to manage a grand household. But she had never expected to inherit a failing estate weighed down by Detant, a resentful stepson. 16-year-old Richard Thornhill, Jonathan's child from his first marriage, had despised Katherine since the day she arrived. His mother had died giving birth to him in 1831, and he saw Katherine as an intruder replacing the woman he had lost. Richard was quiet, withdrawn, and spent most of his time in the library, keeping away from Katherine and the daily running of the plantation. To her, he was weak and sentimental, too soft on the enslaved people, even daring to suggest once that they should be taught to read. She had silenced him immediately, warning him never to speak of such dangerous ideas again. The Thornhill estate reflected years of decline. The main house, built in 1805 in the Federal style, was a 2-story brick home with 6 columns across the front porch. Its paint was peeling, its roof leaking in several places. Inside, furniture was a mismatched blend: some heirlooms, others cheap replacements bought after Jonathan sold the finer pieces to pay gambling debts. Behind the house stood the kitchen, smokehouse, dairy, and overseer's quarters, all in disrepair. Further back, under Spanish moss hanging from old oaks, were the cabins of the enslaved. By 1847, just 31 people remained: 11 men, 13 women, and 7 children. 16 others had already been sold in the last 3 years to pay creditors. Those who stayed lived under constant fear. Knowing more sales were inevitable, Katherine spent the month after Jonathan's death in cold determination. Her lawyer, Ambrose Talbot, told her plainly she could sell the estate and its people, settle debts, and live quietly in Augusta under her father's roof, or she could try to restore profitability. He doubted that was even possible with the exhausted land and dwindling resources. Neither choice suited Katherine. Returning to Augusta meant shame, a life of dependency, branded as the widow who couldn't preserve her inheritance. But traditional methods wouldn't save Thornhill either. The land was ruined, the tools old, the workforce too small to make cotton profitable, and she had no money to buy more enslaved people. One night, staring at account books by candlelight, Katherine conceived her plan. If she couldn't buy more workers, she would breed them, but not in the careless way most plantations did, encouraging families to have children and waiting years before they became productive. Katherine envisioned something calculated and controlled. She would create a population bound by blood, people who couldn't be sold because they were her own descendants, who would carry a loyalty to the estate written into their lineage. It was monstrous, but to Katherine, it was brilliant. She was still young enough to bear children. She would choose the strongest men among the enslaved and conceive children with them. Those children would know who their mother was, be given slightly better treatment to secure their devotion, and later paired with enslaved women to produce more. Within 2 decades, Katherine imagined, she would command a labor force of 50 or more, her blood, her property. She began recording her ideas in a journal, not a diary, but what she called her cultivation records, filled with notes, calculations, and coded terms. She used a substitution cipher to disguise her writings. Children became seedlings, chosen men were root, pregnancies were plantings. The pages were covered with diagrams that looked more like livestock breeding, charts than human records. Her first choice was Isaac, a 24-year-old man born on the estate, known for his strength and steady nature. She called him to the main house one March evening in 1847, after the rest of the workers had already gone to their quarters. Katherine later recorded that night in her journal, with only a brief note: first planting completed with rootstock 1, weather clear and mild. 3 weeks later, she summoned him again, and twice more before the end of the month. By April, she was certain she was with child. She wrote it down with the same cold detachment she used for recording crops. Initial cultivation successful. Anticipate harvest in December. Richard Thornhill began to sense something was off with his stepmother in late May of that year. He noticed she had stopped her usual morning rides, saying the heat was too much, even though summer in Georgia had only just begun. She now often ate her meals alone in her room and dismissed the servant who normally attended her, preferring to handle things herself. For someone so focused on appearances, her sudden withdrawal was unusual. But what truly unsettled Richard was a conversation he overheard in early June. He was in the library, tucked behind a tall bookcase, when Katherine met with Miriam Grayson in the parlor. Mrs. Grayson, the local midwife, was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s who worked for both white families and enslaved ones across Burke County. Richard knew her a little. She was known as skilled, but also as someone who kept quiet and never pried. "Absolutely. You're certain?" Mrs. Grayson asked in her clipped professional tone. "Quite certain," Katherine replied. "I should think sometime in early December. And Mr. Thornhill passed in February, you said?" There was silence. Richard held his breath, pressed against the shelves. My husband and I were together in January, shortly before his final illness, Katherine said calmly. Of course, Mrs. Grayson answered carefully, her voice even, though tinged with doubt. I'll need to examine you properly, and we should discuss the delivery. Will you want me here at the house? Yes, and I'll need your discretion, Miriam. Always. You have it? Only after they had both gone did Richard step out, his hands trembling. The timeline didn't add up. His father had been bedridden throughout January, delirious with fever and chills, unable to leave his bed, let alone be intimate. Richard had sat by him through many of those nights. It was impossible. Katherine's child had been conceived after Jonathan's death, with someone else. The realization sickened him. If word spread that Katherine carried an illegitimate child, it would ruin the family's reputation completely. Creditors would pounce, the Danforths in Augusta would cut ties, and scandal would engulf them. But beyond the social disaster, what horrified Richard most was Katherine's intent. She meant to pass this child off as Jonathan's heir, to build her future on a deliberate lie. Richard thought about what to do. He could confront her, but at 16 he had no authority, and she controlled everything. He could go to lawyer Talbot in Westboro, but without evidence it would be her word against his. Writing to his grandfather in Augusta was pointless. Katherine read every letter, leaving the estate. So Richard chose to watch and wait. He noticed Katherine often called Isaac to the house at night, always when the overseer was away. He saw that she spoke to Isaac differently than the others, not kindly, but with an odd formality, using full sentences instead of sharp commands. By July, Richard was sure Isaac was the father of her child. The thought horrified him, not only because it crossed every boundary of law and society, but because it revealed Katherine's chilling calculation. The full truth emerged in August, when Katherine traveled to West. Richard searched her study, hoping to find documents that might help him. Inside a locked drawer of her desk, he discovered a leather-bound journal. The lock was simple enough to force, and though the writing was in cipher, Richard had always been good with codes. After 3 days of work, he cracked the substitution. What he found froze his blood. Katherine's affair with Isaac was not just an indiscretion, it was part of a plan. She had laid out a breeding program in meticulous detail. Her goal was to bear multiple children with chosen enslaved men, raise them on the plantation, and eventually have them interbreed to create a growing population tied by blood to the Thornhill Estate and to her. The journal was filled with charts and breeding predictions, notes on physical traits she found desirable, and cold speculation on whether strength, intelligence, or temperament could be passed on. It read like a livestock manual, except the stock were people. Richard painstakingly copied several pages into plain English, though his hand shook so badly he could hardly write. At last, he had proof. He could expose her. But that very night at dinner, Katherine fixed him with her pale green eyes and asked casually, "Richard, have you been in my study?" Some of my papers seemed disturbed. "No, ma'am," he lied. "I keep things locked for good reason," she said evenly, slicing her meat with precise strokes. "If I ever found my privacy had been violated in such a way, I would be forced to take serious action. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good, because family loyalty is everything. Without it, we're nothing but animals tearing each other apart. I know you loved your father. I would hate to see his memory tarnished by scandal, especially scandal that might come from within this house." Her meaning was unmistakable. If he tried to expose her, she would ruin him instead. Who would anyone believe? A respected widow from a prominent family, or a resentful 16-year-old stepson? That night, Richard burned the copies, though he kept watching her. But soon, he found himself growing ill. It started with fatigue. By September, he could barely read by afternoon. His appetite faded, headaches throbbed constantly, and his muscles weakened. By October, stomach pains came and went. Katherine showed devoted concern. She ordered him to rest, brought him soup and soft foods. She prepared herself, even called in Mrs. Grayson to examine him. The midwife, acting as physician, diagnosed nervous exhaustion, possibly consumption. She prescribed rest, fresh air, and a tonic Katherine obtained from a pharmacy in Augusta. Tuberculosis often strikes young men of sensitive nature, Katherine murmured, adjusting his pillows with gentle hands. Your father had a cousin who died from it at your age. We must be cautious. Katherine's words were gentle, but Richard wasn't fooled. He had spent hours in the library and knew the signs of arsenic poisoning, the fatigue, stomach distress, and growing weakness. He understood then that Katherine was killing him slowly, disguising murder as illness, erasing the only person who could expose her. But Richard was trapped. He was too weak to leave, to cut off from help. The servants obeyed Katherine without question. The overseers seldom came near the house. By November, Richard could barely stand, his body confined to the second floor. He tried one last desperate act in late November. Over several exhausting days, he drafted a letter to his grandfather Danforth in Augusta, laying out everything: the breeding program, the hidden journal, the poisoning. He sealed it and entrusted it to Pearl, a young servant girl, begging her to mail it in Westboro and keep it secret. Pearl, terrified of her mistress, handed the letter to Katherine. Katherine read it without a flicker of expression, then tossed it into the fireplace in front of Richard. You're very sick, darling, she said softly, almost tenderly. The fever has touched your mind. You're imagining things that don't exist. It's a mercy, really, that your suffering won't last long. Richard Thornhill died on December 3, 1847, 3 weeks shy of his 17th birthday. Dr. Samuel Pritchard of Westboro was called to certify the death. He wrote down consumption as the cause, noting how rapidly the boy had wasted away. At the funeral, Katherine wept with perfect decorum and wore mourning black for a year. 4 days after the burial, she delivered a healthy son. She named him Jonathan after her late husband, insisting he was simply premature, an explanation that silenced most doubts. Few in Burke County bothered to trace the timing, and those who did kept their suspicions private. From 1848 to 1856, Thornhill Estate transformed in ways neighbors called miraculous. The plantation, once close to ruin, began to prosper again. Cotton yields rose. The enslaved population increased. Katherine Thornhill developed a reputation as a competent but reclusive mistress who managed with efficiency, yet behind closed doors. That efficiency was rooted in cruelty. Between 1848 and 1853, Katherine bore 4 more children. Daughters, Eleanor, Abigail, and Margaret, and another son, Samuel. Every birth was overseen only by Miriam Grayson, who was now fully entangled in Katherine's schemes. In return, Miriam received far more than her usual fees, steady payments, silence money, and even a rent-free cottage at the edge of the estate. But Miriam's duties went deeper than attending Katherine's deliveries. She also enforced Katherine's control over the enslaved women. Whenever pregnancies occurred outside the arranged pairings Katherine demanded on, they inevitably did. Miriam was ordered to intervene. Using herbal abortifacients, she induced miscarriages in secret, often in a back room near the overseer's quarters. Women rarely spoke of what they endured, the pain and grief too heavy, their voices silenced by a system that denied them any control over their own bodies. Yet whispers still spread. Women who had been with child 1 week, only to bleed and lose everything the next, with Miriam's name always lurking in the shadows. One woman, Ruth, resisted. In 1851, 5 months pregnant, she had conceived with Samuel, a young field hand she loved, not with the man Katherine had assigned. Katherine ordered Miriam to end the pregnancy. Ruth fled, making it nearly 4 miles into the pine woods before the dogs caught her. She was dragged back, pinned down, and forced to take the bitter compounds. She survived, but her spirit did not. From then on, Ruth worked silently, mechanically, until a fever epidemic claimed her 2 years later, at just 24. But Ruth's story was only one of many. By 1856, Katherine had 7 children of her own, all raised in a strange twilight space. Officially, they were enslaved. Katherine registered them that way, claiming they were born to enslaved women on her property, which gave her legal ownership. In practice, though, they lived in the main house, dressed better, ate better, and were taught secretly by Katherine herself. Jonathan, the eldest, was 8 by then, a solemn boy with his mother's sharp features, green eyes, and auburn hair. He knew nothing of his true father. Isaac sold off to Alabama in 1849 once Katherine no longer needed him, had become a forgotten ghost. The sale money helped erase the estate's lingering debts. Katherine told her children they were orphans she had taken in out of kindness. They believed her, and she taught them to read and write, ignoring Georgia's strict laws against teaching enslaved people. Katherine was preparing them, molding them for the next stage of her plan. But that required patience. She needed them grown, mature, ready for the breeding program she had mapped out in her journal. She tracked every detail, their growth, health, temperaments, strengths, intelligence, obedience. She was already plotting marriages years into the future, treating them like pieces in a long, cold experiment. Meanwhile, Katherine continued, bearing more children. Between 1854 and 1856, she had 3 more sons, William and Henry, and a daughter named Caroline. Each had a different father, carefully chosen from among the enslaved men. Her criteria were simple: strong bodies, good health, clear eyes, sound teeth. Their personalities meant nothing. They were, to her, only breeding stock. The men had no choice. Refusal meant punishment or sale. Some of them understood the truth that Katherine's children were their blood, though they could never acknowledge or protect them. The cruelty of that knowledge was unbearable. One man, Thomas, was chosen in 1855. He was 26, married to Hannah, who was carrying their first child. When Thomas resisted Katherine's summons, the overseer, Virgil Kane, whipped him in front of everyone. A brutal warning of what happened to those who defied the mistress. The 39 lashes left scars on his back that never healed. Yet Katherine still summoned him to the main house. Thomas obeyed, because he had no choice. But he never told Hannah what took place there, and she never asked. Some truths were too venomous to speak aloud. By 1856, Thornhill Estate seemed ordinary on the surface, but its foundation was shaped by Katherine's twisted design. About 20 adults and their children worked the fields of cotton and corn under the overseer's watch. In the big house, 3 women and 1 elderly man kept things running, cooking and cleaning. And then there were Katherine's so-called special children, 10 of them by that year, ranging from newborns to 8 years old. These children stood in a strange place within the plantation. Other enslaved people disliked them for their small advantages, but also pitied them for what they symbolized. Everyone in the quarters understood, even without modern words like eugenics or breeding program. They saw Katherine's careful notes, her periodic measurements, her locked journals. They knew these children weren't simply being raised, they were being prepared. Katherine hinted at it often enough. The children were meant to create the next generation of laborers. They would never be sold or freed, because they were being bound by blood to Thornhill forever. It was cruelty, dressed up as innovation, but on an isolated Georgia plantation in the 1850s. With power resting entirely in the hands of the owner, Katherine faced no interference. The only one who could have posed a risk was lawyer Talbot in Westboro, who managed the estate's paperwork. He might have noticed troubling signs, but he valued profit over questions, and Katherine's estate was becoming profitable. Cotton yields rose, debts shrank, and her breeding provided more workers without cost. Talbot chose silence because success paid well. Secrecy was easy at Thornhill. The plantation stood 7 miles from Westboro, the road often muddy and impassable in winter. Neighbors were distant, the closest plantation 3 miles away. Katherine seldom entertained, avoided social calls. And when she appeared in public, whether at Sunday service or occasional gatherings, she posed as a respectable widow, managing her husband's estate with Christian grace. No one suspected the nightmare within the whitewashed walls of Thornhill, and even if they had, would they have cared? Georgia in the 1850s thrived on enslaved labor. Katherine's system was colder and more deliberate, but not entirely different from what countless other plantations already practiced. That was the most chilling truth. She had only taken the logic of slavery to its darkest end. Yet such systems carried the seeds of their collapse. Change was brewing, though few in 1856 could imagine how soon or how violently it would strike. The late 1850s brought rising tension across Georgia. National politics boiled over with the question of slavery in new territories. In Kansas, settlers shed blood over the issue, and the courthouse in Westboro echoed with anxious debate. The election of 1856 gave the country James Buchanan, but resolved nothing. Katherine, however, remained detached from politics. Her mind stayed fixed on Thornhill and her long-term vision. By 1859, her oldest children neared adolescence. Jonathan was 11, Eleanor 10, Abigail 9, too young still for the next phase of her plan. But Katherine was already preparing, deciding which young women would eventually be paired with them. Around this time, she built what she called the Heritage Room in a hidden section of the East Wing. She told the servants it would hold family keepsakes. In reality, it became a shrine to her twisted program. The room had no windows, lit only by oil lamps. Its shelves carried 3 leather-bound journals filled with Katherine's coded notes of rebirth, pairing, and observation. Small glass vials lined the walls, each marked with a name and date, holding locks of hair from every child. These samples were arranged by lineage, forming a physical record of her breeding experiment. On the central table, she drew detailed family trees, not of real kinship, but of her planned pairings. She noted expected results: strong constitution, good teeth, obedient, clever. It looked like charts for livestock, except these were human names. Abigail linked to Thomas's son Jacob. Eleanor to Isaac's son Marcus, not yet born but expected in 1862. Margaret to Samuel's nephew Peter. Katherine spent hours in this room, sketching generations to come, dreaming of an estate filled with hundreds of workers, descended from her bloodline bound to Thornhill forever. In her mind, it was revolutionary, a plantation free from labor shortages, free from expensive purchases, free from escape. These people would be family, in the most literal, horrifying sense. To make this vision work, she tightened control over social structures. Her biological children lived near the main house, while other enslaved children were sent to the quarters and fields. Yet Katherine still needed them for her pairings, so she used a mix of reward and threat. Families who complied gained small favors. Those who resisted faced separation or sale. The pressure was relentless. One woman, Violet, had 3 daughters. In 1860, Katherine decided Violet's eldest, Sarah, just 14, would be paired with Elijah, a field hand in his 30s. Sarah was terrified. She was still a child, and Elijah could have been her father. Violet begged for mercy, asking Katherine to wait. Katherine's answer was cold. "You have 2 younger daughters, Violet. Shall I sell them instead? Or will Sarah do her duty for this estate, and for you?" That autumn, Sarah was forced into the pairing. 9 months later, she gave birth to a daughter and died from the delivery. She was just 15 when she gave birth, and she never survived it. Violet, her mother, never recovered from losing her. She drifted through her days in silence, working like a machine, until in 1862, she walked into the Savannah River and drowned. But tragedies like Sarah's and Violet's were invisible to the outside world. To the few visitors who ever came, Thornhill looked like a well-run plantation, fields in order, a sturdy house, workers who seemed well-fed and clothed. The truth stayed buried in the slave quarters, hidden in the heritage room, locked inside Katherine's coded journals. Then came 1860, and everything began to unravel. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. South Carolina seceded that December. Georgia followed in January 1861, its delegates voting overwhelmingly to leave the Union and join the Confederacy. By April, war was underway with the attack on Fort Sumter. At first, many Georgians believed it would be short a few months, maybe a year. But the war dragged through 1861, 1862, and into 1863. Burke County's young men marched off to fight in Virginia and Tennessee. Some returned in pine boxes. Others never came back at all. The war cut into Katherine's carefully laid plans. The overseer, Virgil Kane, enlisted and was killed at Shiloh in 1862. Replacing him proved difficult. Most able-bodied white men were off fighting. She eventually hired Silas Kendrick, an elderly man too old for the army. Kendrick was less brutal, but also less effective. The enslaved at Thornhill began to sense the shift in power. Whispers passed through secret networks connecting plantations, Union victories, Lincoln's proclamation, freeing enslaved people in Confederate territory. Rumors of what would happen if the Yankees came south. Katherine tried to tighten her grip. She forbade anyone from leaving the plantation, even to see relatives. She slightly increased rations to discourage runaways, and she accelerated her breeding program, forcing children into pairings earlier than she had planned. Her eldest, Jonathan, turned 15 in December 1862. Katherine decided it was time. She chose Rachel, a 16-year-old daughter of a field hand. Rachel had no voice in the matter. In February 1863, Katherine staged a wedding in the main house, her own invention, a parody of a ceremony meant only to disguise the reality of forced breeding. Jonathan, who had grown up under Katherine's control, believed this was his duty. He never realized Katherine was his own mother. Rachel, silent with trauma, submitted. The quarters, however, saw everything. They understood this was the next stage of Katherine's design. And with that realization, a quiet rage began to spread. By spring 1863, the Confederacy reeled. Vicksburg had fallen, giving the Union control of the Mississippi. Gettysburg was a disaster. Shortages of food, fabric, and supplies spread through Burke County. White families struggled. The enslaved suffered worse. Katherine rationed harshly. But she also faced a new problem. Her special children were beginning to suspect the truth of who they really were. It began with Ela Lanina, Katherine's second child, now 14. She had always been the sharpest, the one who asked questions. In May 1863, while helping Katherine in the study, she found one of the coded journals Katherine had left unlocked. Katherine had taught her to read, and boredom drove her to puzzle out the cipher. Like Richard, years earlier, she worked slowly, piece by piece, until the code yielded its secrets. What she uncovered shattered her world. One entry detailed her own conception. Second, planting with rootstock 2. Thomas, age 21. Excellent specimen. Strong back, good teeth. Weather warm and humid. Anticipate harvest late October 1848. Elena read it over and over, her hands trembling. Rootstock 2. Thomas. She knew him quiet, a field hand in his 30s, a man who never looked anyone in the eye. He was her father. Katherine was her mother. She wasn't an orphan taken in out of charity. She was the product of an experiment. And if it was true for her, it was true for Jonathan, Abigail, and all the others Katherine had raised in the main house. Worse still, the journal contained charts showing her future. Her name was linked to a boy, not yet grown, Marcus, son of Isaac, born 1862. Pairing with Eleanor anticipated 1865. The words made her sick. Katherine meant to breed her like livestock. That night, Ella Lanina confronted Katherine, trembling with rage. "I read your journal. I know what you are. I know what I am." Katherine froze, her eyes cold. "You should not have done that. You are my mother. Thomas is my father, and you plan to breed us like animals." "Sit down," Katherine ordered. Her voice carried the weight of a threat. Eleanor sat, shaking. Katherine paced, then spoke with calculated calm. "Yes, I am your biological mother. Yes, I've built a program to make this estate self-sustaining. And yes, you and the others will take part when the time comes." "I won't," Eleanor whispered, though her voice wavered. "You will, because the alternative is far worse." Katherine leaned close, her face inches away. "Here, you eat well, you wear good clothes, you can read and write. Refuse, and I'll sell you to Alabama or Mississippi where field hands are worked to death, where women are brutalized daily, where literacy earns a whipping. Is that what you want?" Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. She said nothing. "I thought not. You will tell no one, not your brothers, not your sisters, not the quarters. You will go on as before, and when it's time, you'll do your part. Do you understand?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered, but Katherine had made her first mistake. She had revealed too much, too directly. Eleanor would not stay silent. Not immediately. But carefully, quietly, she would begin to share the truth. She first told Jonathan, repeating the journal entries she had committed to memory. But Jonathan's response was not the same as Ella Lanina's. Katherine had shaped him so completely, cutting him off from any other way of seeing the world, that he struggled to understand why her plan was so wrong. "Katherine gave us a better life," he argued, bewildered by Eleanor's fury. "We could have been working the fields. Instead, we're here. We're property, Jonathan. We're slaves. Our own mother enslaved us. She's keeping us safe, keeping us together," he insisted. "If we were sold, we'd be torn apart, scattered to different places. This way, we stay together at Thornhill." Ella realized in horror that Jonathan had been molded too well. He couldn't recognize the prison Katherine had built around them all. But Abigail, sharp at 13, grasped it instantly when Ella Lenina explained. Margaret, only 12, understood as well. The younger ones were too small to fully comprehend, but the older children knew now. They knew what they were and what Katherine expected of them. That knowledge changed everything in the main house. Katherine sensed it. The shift in the air, the way her children's eyes lingered on her. Fear remained, but beneath it was calculation, waiting. She knew they were holding back, biding their time. Katherine weighed her options. She could sell the older ones, remove the threat, but that would waste years of her effort. She could break them with cruelty, but too much violence might ruin them for her breeding plans. She needed them strong, healthy, able to bear children. So, Katherine chose another path. She would prove the cost of defiance through someone else. In August 1863, a girl named Grace tried to flee Thornhill. She was 17, carrying a child, and desperate. Forced into pairing with a field hand against her will, she couldn't bear bringing a baby into that world. One night, she ran east toward the Savannah River, hoping to cross into South Carolina and reach Union lines. She was caught within half a day. The dogs tracked her to a creek only 3 miles away. They dragged her back, locked her in an outbuilding. The next morning, Katherine gathered everyone, the enslaved people, and her special children, in the yard between quarters and mansion. Grace was brought out, wrists bound. Katherine stood on the porch, her face unreadable. "This woman tried to abandon her duty to this estate and to all of you. She tried to tear apart the family we've built here. Such betrayal must be met with severe punishment." What followed was merciless. Grace was whipped publicly, 20 lashes delivered by old overseer Kendrick, who carried out the order with grim reluctance. Katherine forced every child to watch, even her own blood. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who attempt to leave. But once again, Katherine had misjudged. Instead of terrorizing her people, the punishment revealed something else. Katherine was willing to inflict brutal violence to maintain control, which meant she was afraid. And if she was afraid, it meant they had power, she feared. Rumors began to spread in the quarters in the weeks that followed. Whispers of waiting for the right moment. Whispers of what would come when the war ended, because surely it would. And surely the Yankees would reach them, and surely life would change. All they needed to do was endure until then. Elenina heard those whispers. She started slipping toward the quarters when Katherine's eyes weren't on her, building ties with the people she had been kept apart from her entire life. She learned things Katherine had hidden about her father Thomas, about other men Katherine had used, about women who had died or been shattered by her program. One October night, Elenina sat with a group of older enslaved women in the woods. They gathered in a circle, voices low in the dark. A woman named Hope, in her 40s, looked at her with both pity and respect. "Your mama thinks she created something special," Hope said. "Thinks she built a family. But all she made is people who hate her in ways she can't imagine." "What happens when the war ends?" Eleanor asked. "Depends on who wins," Hope replied. "Yankees win, we're free. Confederates win. It stays the same or worse. But either way, your mama can't keep this up. Too many know. Too many angry. Something's going to break." "What if we made it break?" Elenina asked. The women stared at her. Hope leaned closer. "What you mean, child? What if we didn't wait for the war to end? What if we ended it ourselves?" The thought lingered, dangerous and tempting. One of the younger women, Anna, spoke. "You mean running? Taking everyone and running? Or fighting?" Eleanor said. "There's only Mrs. Katherine and old Kendrick. There are 40 of us. 20 of them are children," Hope answered plainly. "And where would we go? Confederates hunt runaways, kill us, or sell us farther south. And you think they'll see you as one of us or one of them?" The question burned because Elenina didn't know. She was Katherine's daughter, raised in the main house, able to read and write, her skin lighter than most in the quarters. Would they truly accept her if blood was spilled? Before she could reply, footsteps tore through the brush. The women scattered, vanishing into the night. Elenina raced back to the house, heart hammering, wondering if they'd been overheard, if Katherine would find out, if everything was about to collapse. But no retribution came. The next days passed as if unnoticed. Yet the seed had been planted. The belief they didn't need to wait for deliverance. They could make it happen. That thought spread like fire through the quarters. Katherine sensed the change, but couldn't trace its source. She tightened her grip, had Kendrick patrol at night, restricted movement even more. The tension at Thornhill grew like a storm brewing, dark clouds massing, electricity buzzing in the air, everyone waiting for the strike. The breaking point came in March 1864, though not as anyone expected. Confederate cavalry rode through Burke County, seizing supplies, food, cloth, horses for the war. Katherine had no choice but to provide what they demanded: corn, cured meat, and her 2 best horses. They camped only one night in the fields, then left at dawn. But their stay left an impact. The soldiers spoke freely about the war, and their news was grim for the South. Sherman's forces pushed deep into Georgia. Union armies were closing in from every direction. Some soldiers admitted openly the fight was lost, that they only wanted to go home, that the war couldn't be carried on much longer. The enslaved people at Thornhill heard every word. Hope surged through the quarters. Freedom was coming weeks, months, but it was coming. All they needed was to last a little longer. Katherine, terrified of what that hope meant for her carefully built plans, chose to act. If the South collapsed, her whole system would vanish. Her special children would be gone. 16 years of planning and control wasted. She couldn't let that happen. On the night of March 17, 1864, Katherine gathered her biological children inside the main house. Jonathan, Elijah Nena, Abigail Margaret, Samuel, William, Henry, Caroline, and the 3 youngest, still infants. 11 children in all, from 16 years old down to a baby barely 6 months. Things are going to change very soon, Katherine told them, her voice calm but her eyes burning. The war may not end in our favor. The Yankees may come. They may try to take you from me, to tear apart this family. I cannot let that happen. Elalina felt a chill crawl down her spine. What are you planning? We're going to protect our future, Katherine replied. Tonight, she led them to the heritage room in the East Wing, the one only Jonathan had ever seen. Katherine lit the lamps, revealing shelves stacked with journals, vials of hair, and family charts pinned to the walls. This is our legacy, she said. What we've built, and no one will take it from us. She opened a locked cabinet and drew out a small wooden box. Inside were glass bottles filled with a clear liquid. This is called laudanum. In small doses, it eases pain. In larger doses, it brings eternal peace. Abigail gasped. You want to poison us? I want to protect you, Katherine said quickly, her voice cracking with intensity. If the Yankees come, if they free the others, where will you go? You're not white enough for white society, not black enough for the other side. You'll belong nowhere. Outsiders with no place. Is that better than staying here? Staying together? Staying with me? Yes, Eleanor said firmly. Anything is better than this. Katherine's face went hard. You're too young to understand. All of you are. But I am your mother, and I know what's best for this family. She reached for the bottles, but Jonathan stepped in front of her. 16, nearly her height, and something had shifted in his face. No, Jonathan, don't be foolish. You understand. You always have. I understood what you told me, he said. But Eleanor showed me the journals. I read everything about us, about Father Isaac, about Father Thomas, about all of them. I know what you did. I know what you are. I am your mother. You're a monster, Jonathan said, his voice cracking. Katherine struck him, the sound sharp in the small room. How dare you? After everything I gave you, everything I sacrificed, you sacrificed nothing, Ilalanina shouted, stepping to his side. You used people. You destroyed them. You destroyed us. Katherine looked at them, really looked for the first time. All her children stood together, even the youngest who didn't fully grasp what was happening. They were united against her. She had lost them. In that moment, Katherine made a desperate choice. If she couldn't keep her children, she would at least preserve proof of what she had done. She seized the journals, the charts, the vials of hair, clutching them close. You think you can deny me? You think you can erase this? These records will outlive me. They'll show what I built, that I was right. She shoved past them and ran, her arms full of evidence. Out of the room, through the house, across the yard, toward the quarters. What happened next depends on who you ask. Memories later conflicted, twisted by trauma. But some things are certain. Katherine reached the quarters, clutching her journals and samples. The enslaved people poured out, watching the woman who had ruled them for 16 years come running toward them in the night, carrying proof of her crimes. And someone, maybe Hope, maybe one of the men, maybe several together, decided this was the moment. This was when it ended. Katherine Thornhill vanished that night. Her journals were found scattered in the mud outside the quarters, pages ripped and wet. The hair samples were smashed. The charts were burned. And Katherine herself was gone. Jonathan and Ilalanina arrived minutes later, to chaos people shouting, running, the bitter smoke of burning papers hanging in the air. But no Katherine. Where is she? Jonathan demanded. Hope looked at him, unreadable. Gone. That's all you need to know. She's gone, and she ain't coming back. What did you do? What she deserved, Hope answered flatly. Now you got a choice, boy. You can raise hell for your mama, or you can accept that justice was done tonight and let it rest. Jonathan looked at Eleanor. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but she nodded. Let it rest, she whispered. By morning, Katherine Thornhill was officially missing. Overseer Kendrick searched but found nothing. He reported it to the sheriff in Waynesboro, who investigated and concluded that Mrs. Thornhill had likely fled in fear of the Union Army. A reasonable assumption with the war collapsing. No one from the quarters ever spoke of that night. Jonathan and Eleanor said nothing. The records simply state that Katherine disappeared on March 17, 1864, never seen again. But everyone at Thornhill knew the truth. Katherine had been killed, her body hidden somewhere on the plantation's 1,700 acres. Her children, her experiments, her legacy chose not to expose her killers, because they understood her fate had been earned. The war ended 14 months later. Sherman's army cut through Georgia, though they passed 30 miles north of Burke County, never reaching Thornhill directly. The Confederacy collapsed in April 1865. Slavery ended through occupation, the 13th Amendment, and the collapse of the old order. At Thornhill, freedom was messy. Jonathan, Katherine's oldest, had some claim to the property, but legally he was still enslaved under Georgia law. His position was impossible to define. The lawyer in Waynesboro tried to sort it out, then gave up. The estate slipped into limbo. Most of the formerly enslaved left within weeks, scattering across Georgia and beyond, seeking lost family, work, or simply escape from the place of their suffering. Some remained for a time. Hope stayed, helping those with nowhere else to go. Thomas stayed too, Eleanor's father, who after 16 years could finally acknowledge her. They spoke of Katherine once, briefly, then never again, the wound too deep to reopen. Elenina herself stayed until 1867. She learned to live free, though her scars never healed. She later moved to Savannah, became a seamstress, and married a carpenter named William Foster. She never had children. She never spoke of Thornhill or her mother. When she died in 1903, her obituary never mentioned Burke County. Jonathan stayed longer, trying to farm with a few freed men who remained. But cotton prices collapsed, the land was exhausted, and the estate's reputation spread through the black community like a curse. By 1869, Jonathan finally gave up and walked away from the estate. He drifted westward and eventually resurfaced in Texas under a false identity. He died in 1891, leaving behind only a few belongings. Among them a small notebook filled with one haunting line written over and over. I did not choose this. I did not choose this. I did not choose this. Thornhill Estate itself soon collapsed into ruin. In 1871, a suspicious fire partially destroyed the main house, while the remaining buildings crumbled over time. By 1878, the land had been taken for unpaid taxes and sold at auction to a timber company that stripped the old forests and cut the property into parcels. Yet, in that same year of 1871, something was unearthed that briefly pushed the estate's dark story back into public view. A driller working on nearby land broke into an abandoned cistern once part of Thornhill. Inside, 30 feet underground, lay a skeleton. The remains were well preserved by the cool, dry air, and clearly belonged to a woman in her 30s or 40s. Fragments of fabric suggested she had worn a dress from the 1860s. A corroded locket near the bones held two tiny portraits, a man and a young boy. When examined in Waynesboro, the coroner concluded the woman had died from a crushing blow to the head. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery, officially listed only as unknown female. Discovered former Thornhill property, 1871. But within Burke County's black community, people already knew the truth. The tale had been preserved in whispers shared in kitchens and churches, in coded words shielding those who had lived through that March night in 1864. They knew Katherine Thornhill had been killed by those she enslaved and tormented, and that her body had been hidden deep within a cistern. They knew that, in their way, justice had finally come. Over the years, fragments of the truth surfaced. In 1889, a dying man in Alabama confessed to a minister that he had helped kill his mistress during the war, though he gave no name or details. The minister dutifully recorded it in his notes. In 1902, a Savannah woman Hope's granddaughter wrote a brief memoir recalling the night the devil mistress vanished, and no one shed a tear. The clearest evidence came in 1923, when a historian, digging into Burke County's Civil War past, stumbled on a forgotten stack of letters in the courthouse basement. Among them was a 1865 letter from Union Captain Samuel Reynolds, who had led one of the first federal units into the area after the war. Reynolds reported finding deeply troubling signs at Thornhill, systematic breeding experiments forced upon enslaved people, even involving the owner's own bloodline. He wrote that the grotesque details were too awful to fully describe, but multiple witnesses confirmed that Katherine Thornhill had engineered a program of generational reproduction to create a self-sustaining enslaved population. Witnesses also told him she had vanished in March 1864, though they stopped short of saying what happened. Reynolds noted that the implication was clear, and that he chose not to investigate further, believing that whatever punishment she met was deserved. He ordered his men to remain silent. The letter lay forgotten until a graduate student uncovered it in 1954 while researching Reconstruction. She tried to corroborate the story by speaking with elderly residents. Most denied knowing anything, but one woman, 93 years old, a descendant of someone enslaved at Thornhill, summed it up in a single line. Some things happened that needed to happen. Some people did things that needed doing, and that's all that needs to be said. The last lingering mystery of Thornhill involves the 23 children discovered locked in the cellar when Union soldiers arrived. Captain Reynolds documented them, as did letters from his men. The children were placed with freed families in the area, but their trail fades there. Some likely lived to adulthood and had children of their own. If so, people alive today in Georgia and beyond may unknowingly carry Katherine Thornhill's bloodline. They could descend from Jonathan, Eleanor, or other children born from the breeding program. Perhaps they even bear features once associated with Katherine's offspring: green eyes, auburn hair, angular cheekbones. They would never realize. Their ancestry tied back to a woman who sought to build her dynasty through calculated cruelty. They would not know that their great-great-great-grandmother lies in an unmarked grave, put there by those she abused, whose names remain hidden because they protected each other's secrets even after freedom came. Today, the site of Thornhill is nothing but woods and farmland. No historical marker stands there. Local histories omit the estate almost entirely. The stone foundation still lies beneath decades of leaves and brush. The old cistern where Katherine's body was cast has long since caved in. Yet the story endures, whispered in Burke County's black community, murmured in genealogical research, echoed in scholarly work on slavery and eugenics. It survives because it embodies a grim truth about American history, not just the violence of slavery itself, but the ways people will rationalize and systematize cruelty when given absolute control. Katherine Thornhill convinced herself she was creating something new, a revolutionary model of plantation management that would secure her family's future. In reality, she was perfecting one of humanity's darkest evils, and in the end, those she exploited erased her legacy as surely as she had tried to erase theirs. So what do you think of this story? Do you believe we now know everything, or do secrets still lie hidden beneath that land in Burke County? The full truth may never surface. Survivors carried some things to their graves, and perhaps that was their right. Not every story belongs to historians or storytellers. Some belong only to those who endured them. Still, we can honor their courage by remembering that their defiance mattered, their survival mattered, and they outlasted the system built to break them. If this story made you reflect, if it made you consider the hidden past in your own community, share your thoughts in the comments. Pass this video along to anyone who values deep explorations into America's darkest history. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that force us to confront the shadows of the past.